Hi there, thanks for joining me today. My name's Jo and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator. I'm based in Norfolk in the UK. I have a bit of a sneak peek for you today for our Monday mashup. This is a new stamp set which is coming at the beginning of August called Happy Holidays. Now I was immediately drawn to this because I love robins. And he's actually a very decent sized robin as well. So it was really nice to have an English bird. So this is the card we're making. So I have used the no line painting technique for my robin. This was my first sort of little play with him really. So I may make some little amendments as I go on, as we often do. But I wanted you to see him and to see how actually you can create quite a simple card. So I hope you like that. Let's get making. Okay, so I'm going to be using our Fluid 100 paper and I want to use the no line technique. So I'm going to try and stamp it in Sahara sand because that's a really soft colour, and it just sort of kind of we lose that colour once we start painting. I've got a scrap of card here and this is our beautiful robin stamp, as you can see. Really cute. So I'm going to use, as I say, Sahara sand. So I'm first of all going to ink it. And just onto scrap paper, I want to just stamp it just to see sort of how dark the colour is. Now it is quite dark there, so I'm just going to try second generation. And as you can see, it's just that much softer. So I want to try and lose the line. So I'm going to go with this one here. So what I need to do is to ink it again. So I'm going to stamp off onto my scrap paper here, and then I'm going to pop him just about here. I'm going to put some holly under his legs once we're done. Okay, so there you can see he's quite subtle. I'm hoping you can see that properly, but you'll see him as he starts to come together anyway. Now, we always think of Robin Redbreast as very red, but actually there's quite a limited amount of red that he has. So he's red all around here, and then only this sort of part of his breast, and then this underneath is sort of a white and sort of grey sort of colour. So that's sort of where we're going to go with it. And then the wings and his tail here tend to be more sort of a browny colour. So I'm going for sort of soft suede, and they often have sort of a bit of grey as well. So I'm sort of going to use a mixture of all the colours that I think are going to work really well with this. So I'm going to start off with the brown. So this is soft suede, and I'm just going to put some of the ink onto a block. It's just really just to make sure that I'm not sort of got my ink pads open for a really long period of time. Okay, so I'm hoping you can see this okay. I've just got a normal pot of water, which I will just have here. I'm going to take a piece of kitchen towel as well, because that's always handy to have. Two reasons really. One, I can kind of use it to hold my paper without getting oil onto it, but also I can blot off my actual brush. So I don't want this to be too dark to start with, so I'm going to just mix down some of it just so it waters it slightly. And then what I tend to have to hand is a piece of the watercolour paper, so I can get the right colour, but I can use it as sort of my test palette, so I can see sort of how dark it's going to be. This is quite light at the moment. That's absolutely fine. That's what I want because I want to build up layers. Okay, so I'm going to start off by just starting on his head here. And you'll see that the lines will start to disappear around his head once we get moving. Let's say this is quite light to start with because I want it to be a build-up of colour. I do love robins. Get quite a lot in our garden and they're just beautiful birds. As I say, I mentioned some grey, so I'm going to leave these sort of areas. I'm going to add some grey into those shortly. So this is just one layer of ink really, just to give me a base, and then I can build upon that. So I'm just using a normal paintbrush. You can use your aqua painters if you want to, so you can use whatever you're comfortable with, but I like just a normal paintbrush often when I'm doing this sort of thing. So I'm just going to bring in some more colour. I also want to do part of his wing here, so I'm going to have some more grey coming into this section. So let's just do where he's going to be brown. Okay, so that's given me a base to work with. Now what I can do is to start building up the colour slightly. So I'm pulling in a little bit more of the dark, and I want to sort of concentrate on where kind of his shadows might be. And it's lovely using this no line technique, because you do get a chance to sort of put your own sort of look on him really. Just going to bring some of that brown into around his eye. That is going to be red, that section, but I just wanted to bring a little bit of brown down just to show us how he looks. He's actually going to be quite a quick sort of bird to do, I think. We don't want too much detail. This is going to be a really light sort of. What I do want to do is get that line created between his wing and his back, so that we can actually see it doesn't all sort of mold into one. Now, I'm not an artist, as I've said before in many a video, but what I do like to do is just to sort of put my sort of look onto things. So I can kind of just imagine in my own head how this little robin would look. I think the important thing is that you just enjoy doing the actual painting. Don't worry too much. And let that dry just to give it a chance to go into the paper, and then I'll come back and I will add some more detail to it shortly. So I'm going to do the same with his wing here, and I am going slightly darker this time. Apologies if I've just knocked my camera. I've got it quite low so that you can kind of see what I'm doing. If your brush gets a bit too dry, I don't know if you saw then, it sort of starts to fan out a little bit, so just just wet it and blot it off again, just to get all your bristles together. The beauty of watercolour is you do get the opportunity to kind of go back and soften the colour or darken the colour. It's not a finished once it's kind of done, if you see what I mean. So it's quite useful to be able to go back in. I'm just going to bring in some grey granite, because I think this will be quite a nice sort of grey to mix with it. So I've just put it onto a different block here. I'm just going to blend some in to these sections. Now I do want to blend them, so what we do need to do is just work them together to try and blend the two together. So we'll bring his eye and his red breast in shortly. I'm also going to do a little bit of grey just under his belly here, because this will go into sort of a white area. So I'm just going to pull that colour, and that Sahara sand will obviously pull through as well. Okay, so I'm going to let that all dry for a little while, just let it sort of find its own sort of level, and then we'll go back and we'll add a little bit more detail if we feel it needs it. I'm going to do also his beak. Now his beak is going to be that little bit darker, so what I want to do is to sort of, I'm going to use grey granite, and then I may come back in with some black in a second. I'm going to use grey granite just to mark out his beak. And what I want to do is just add a little bit darker to the underneath section, because that's obviously underneath, it's going to create a little shadow. And this is where I might bring in some black in a second, but I'll just let that dry for a little while. Okay, and then I'm going to bring in some red. So I'm actually going to use two reds. I'm going to use real red, and I'm also going to use a little bit of cherry cobbler, because real red is sort of kind of pillar box red, and a cherry cobbler will just knock that back a little bit, because it's actually more orange. I know we say it's a sort of a red breast, but it's actually more sort of orangey. And having said that out loud, I think now actually I might use a little bit of pumpkin. So I'm going to grab pumpkin pie. Okay, so this is pumpkin pie. And I will see about the cherry cobbler. I might still bring in some cherry cobbler just to darken it down slightly, but I'm going to have a little play with these colours first, just to see how they come out. So this is, as I say, pumpkin pie. Now this is very orange, so we do need to kind of mix it up a little bit just to kind of get to a better orange, because this is very pumpkin colour. So I'm going to take a little bit of the red, and I'm going to mix it in with my pumpkin pie. Okay, so that's probably a little bit too orange. So I'm going to mix in some more of the pumpkin pie with it. And then you can see we start to get this sort of more of a sort of colour of a robin redbreast. But what I do want to do is I want to knock it back just slightly. So I'm actually going to pick up, I think, a little bit of soft suede, not a lot. Just want to mix up the colours just to get a better sort of red breast, which I think we're getting there. Yeah, I think that's nearly that. So what I've mixed up is pumpkin pie, a little bit of real red, and a little bit of soft suede. So it's just broken down that redness and that orangeness, and it's just given us this sort of nice sort of mix. So I'm going to use this here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to start around by his eye. So I will put his eye in last. So I'm just laying down a bit of colour first, and then again I will come back in and we will mix up the colours a little bit. I don't think he'll come to life really until we get an opportunity to add that that eye back in. Okay, and I'm just going to add a little bit of soft suede under here because this is sort of under his wing a little bit, and it will just mean the two colours will blend much better together. They won't sort of be like a distinct line. And here I'm just using water because I just want to lift that join there where the sort of white and the belly sort of meets. I'm just going to blend that down a little bit. Also give them an opportunity to dry because they start to look a slightly different colour once they've had an opportunity to dry, so just bear with it. I love the softness of watercolours. Okay, so I just want to make sure I've got a nice clean brush. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry for a second because I want to put his eye in a moment. But what I'm going to do is just start again, just add in a little bit more detail onto his head. Okay, so I'm thinking his breast is now quite dry. I'm just going to blend this again a little bit. Now a little bit of that orange has come down into that last part of his breast. So I'm just going to blot it, and that will help just to lift a little bit of that. Okay, so I'm quite happy that this is dry now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use black. Now you can do one of two things. You can either use your watercolour to do it, or you can just use a pen. Now I quite like using a pen because I think it's kind of, it lends itself to sort of getting a really nice sharp eye, which is what we're looking for. So it has like a little oval eye. So just drawing the outline, just adding in the colour to it. Okay, and then I'm going to just take a little white gel pen and just add a little white dot. Now this isn't actually, this is just sort of reflect the light on his eye really. It just starts to bring him to life, I think. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is his beak. Now obviously there's a distinct line on his beak. So again, I'm just using a pen just to sort of define that a little bit. And then just a little bit of water. Because remember, the ink in these pens is the same as from our ink pads. So it will enable you to sort of use both mediums, but actually sort of start to get a better sort of like colour mix onto stuff. So I'm just going to go back and tweak some of these little areas. And notice sometimes I'm using more of like a little dabbing motion because I just want there to be a concentration of colour in one area. I say I'm no artist, so I'm sure a proper artist would teach you very, very different. But this is a card maker's sort of outlook on. Just make sure your brush isn't too wet when you're going back in to add detail, because you run the risk of sort of like washing away what you've already done. So just make sure that once you've picked out your colour, you kind of, you know, you're not too wet. Okay, I think he's sort of come together quite nicely. Now what I want to have a look at is actually his feet. Now these are also quite dark, but I don't want to go in too dark too quick, so I'm actually going to use grey granite again. And just sort of get the outline of his little legs. Okay, so I'm just going to scribble a little bit of black onto the block. Now our black, and a lot of blacks, have a bit of a green undertone, so you do need to be a little bit careful, and sometimes the greys are actually better than the black. But if you want to build up sort of a darker colour, that, you know, obviously that's the right way to go. But as I say, they do have a bit of a green undertone, so you just need to be a little bit careful. He is going to have some holly at his feet, so I'm not too worried about getting too much detail in here because a lot of it won't be seen. Just want to try and add a little bit of interest. Okay, so I think I'm reasonably happy with him as he is, so I'm going to move on and do some of the holly, and then what I'll do is I'll come back and have a look at him, because sometimes when you have a look back at them you think that would look better with a little bit of tweaking here and there, so we'll come back to those and have a look if necessary. So now what I want to do is to create some of the holly. Now this stamp set actually comes with a really lovely punch, which is a border punch, which is conveniently holly. So if you wanted to, you could use that. I'm actually going to use the holly out of here because I want to be able to add some sort of different colours into it. So again, I'm just going to stamp it onto a piece of our Fluid 100 paper, and I'm probably going to do possibly two. They're going to be cut about a bit, so I'm going to stamp two and then I can play around with them afterwards. So again, I want to use the no line technique, so I'm going to take Sahara sand and my piece of scrap paper that I had earlier. So I'm just stamping onto the scrap, and then I'm stamping onto my actual paper. I'm going to cut these out, so I'm not too worried sort of where they are. Okay, so now I need to bring in some greens. So I'm going to be using our two new greens, Soft Succulent and Evening Evergreen. Now traditionally holly is very, very dark, but I want to give it some sort of light pieces as well. So I'm just going to cut these off here so I can be working on a smaller piece. And again, I'm just using a block just to pick up my colour. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Soft Succulent to start with because these are going to add my sort of highlights when I come to them, but I'm just going to lay down a sort of base onto my card. Okay, so next I'm going to bring in the real red that I had earlier, and I am going to use a little bit of cherry cobbler. Now, obviously, berries are proper red, so they're not going to be the same colour as our robin. We want them to be quite vibrant. Got berries. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of cherry cobbler, just to darken them down just a tad. Okay, so I'm going to let those dry for a second, and I'll just continue with the other holly. Okay, so I think that one is dry. So now what I want to do is I want to add, again, I'm using a little white pen, and I'm creating a shadow on my berries. And again, you can add some little details to your holly leaves as well if you wish. It's just a way to sort of bring some shadows into it's sort of indicating where the light is catching the berries and the leaves. Okay, so I'm going to cut that one out. Yes, I think I am going to use the other one. But I think also what I want to do is to put like maybe a log that he's sort of standing on. So I'm going to make this really, really simple. And I'm just going to use some soft suede. I'm just going to... So I'm just going to mix up some soft suede to quite a watery consistency, and then I'm going to make him stand on a log. So I don't want it to be too detailed. A lot of it's going to be covered by this holly, but I just think it'd be quite nice to see him look like he's standing on a bit of a log. So don't be afraid just to have a play with these things, because it's just paper and ink at the end of the day. And you can see I've just made a little blodge there, which is not good. But we will do something with that. Okay, I'm just going to bring in some darker now because I want it to be a slightly darker colour. So don't worry about too much detail because we're going to be putting the holly on the top. So this is the grey granite from earlier. And the black. Didn't mean to pick that up. So we kind of lost his feet a little bit here, but that doesn't matter because it's going to be covered. Okay. So the next thing I want to do, well, first of all, I'm going to try and get rid of this little blob that I splashed here. I'm going to put some specks on this later, so I'm not too worried. But it was quite dark, so that's fine. Okay, so this is our holly, which is going to sit onto here. And I think I need another piece of holly just over here. Maybe not all of it. I might just do sort of perhaps 3 leaves of it, but I will see once it's done. Okay. So I think I'm nearly there. Now what I want to do is to do a tiny little bit of a splatter background. Now I don't want a lot of this. So I think I'm going to use some soft succulent to start with. And I want to water this down quite considerably so that when it actually flicks, it's not going to be too dark. Okay, so I'm just going to take some of the ink from my brush and I want to splatter it, but I don't want too much getting over my bird, so I'm just going to cover him a little bit. Just do little taps. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that, so I'm going to leave that there. I'm just going to pop it to one side for a second, just while I mop up. Okay, that will dry really, really quickly, but obviously I don't want to touch it at this stage. And then if we have any little marks like here where it's sort of spread a little bit, we can sort of cover them if we want to, or we can leave them as they are. So it's entirely up to you. So what I'm going to do is glue my holly in place. And all I'm going to do is actually put a little bit of glue onto the berries themselves. And I'm going to allow the leaves, they've got that natural curl where it's sort of been wet, where we've been doing the watercolouring. So I'm just going to let them take their natural sort of shape. Okay, so I am going to use one of the greetings in this stamp set. I really like this one, Christmas Blessing to You and Yours. So I think I'm going to use that one today. Now you can use sort of whatever card you want, or you know, if you want to use a black or something that's a real contrast, you can, or you can keep it very simple and use sort of some more of the Fluid 100 paper. I'm going to use the Fluid 100, and then I'm going to put a little darker coloured sort of border underneath it. So this was just an offcut from my paper. I quite like the idea of a two-tone greeting on this one. So I'm just going to take a post-it note and I'm just going to stick it across the To You and Yours. And I just want to ink the top part, so that's the Christmas greetings part. And they're just going to use one of our right markers, and this one's real red, to the To You and Yours. Okay, I'm just going to give it a quick breath just to make sure that it actually is nice and moist. And then you can see you've got that lovely two-tone greeting. So I'm just going to trim that. I always tend to stamp first and trim afterwards, so that if it's slightly wonky, which it is very slightly, I can play around with the trimming. That's better. So I'm going to zoom out slightly so that you can hopefully see the final parts. Okie dokie. So I can see I've still got a couple of little marks that haven't dried. So I'm just going to blot those just so that I know I'm not going to smudge anything. In fact, I think I'm just going to leave that like that. But what I am going to do is add some something nice and Christmassy, sort of like some thread. You could also do something quite natural, like the linen thread would look quite nice. But as it's Christmas, I'm going to use some of this gold thread, which is the Simply Elegant trim. So you get it in gold and silver. And what I want to do is to create just a little arrangement sort of onto my card here. So I've got 3 little circles or loops around my fingers that I've made there. And then going to take, you can take glue dots. I'm going to take a little bit of double-sided tape because it's what I've got to hand here. And what I tend to do is to actually just pop it onto my thread and then almost wrap it, because then you make sure that they're all held together. And then I'm just going to remove the back, which you'll find it will quite naturally do because you've curled it. Okay, so now I just want to sort of see where I'm going to pop my greeting. Sort of here. So I'm going to pop that on like that. Now that it's stuck down, I can move my thread around to where I want it to be, so I can sort of manipulate it a little bit and reshape it, because it's got sort of, it's not got wire in it as such, but it's quite stiff, so you can actually sort of manipulate where it sort of moves, which is quite nice. This is going to stick across here. So what I do want to do is just to trim that end, because I'm going to pop it onto some 3D foam or some dimensionals. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this here, so I know that I can stick a dimensional here. Now the reason I'm sticking this directly onto my card and not onto here is because I want to avoid this thread. So when it goes over the top, I know that it's going to sit well. So I can pop another one there. So I can see now that that is going to sit nicely across the top there. I'm sorry, there's a very annoying fly in here today. Okay. So that is done. Of course, we have to have a few gems as it's Christmas. I'm just taking some normal Val adhesive gems, just because they're quite delicate. So I wanted it to remain quite delicate. So I'm just going to pop one over that spot that we made earlier, so that that's hidden. You can see I've coloured some of these as well, so you could do that if you wanted to. Let's stick another one here, another one here. It's just to add that little bit of sparkle for Christmas. And then I just need to cut myself a card base. Okay, so that's my card base, and then I'm going to pop this onto dimensionals on here as well, because I think that will give it a really nice sort of Christmassy opulence, if there is such a thing. I always say to my ladies, just make sure you put ones in support in the centre, because especially if it's going through the nail, they can get squashed really easily if they've got sort of a open middle, as I call it. So just make sure you've got enough on there just to support it. And there we go. That is our completed card. So it was just a little bit of fun. It was my first attempt at painting Mr. Robin. So no doubt I will make some sort of adjustments as I go through using him, because he's very, very sweet. So yeah, thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope the video is not too long. You can fast forward if you need to, of course. And I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.